Hey YouTube, and welcome back to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be sharing with you one of my most favorite recipes of all time. My mom used to make this a lot while I was growing up, and it was one of my favorite recipes that she ever made. It's smothered steak, and my sister's actually making this today too. She's the one that gave me the idea, so I'm really hungry. I'm ready to get started, so let's go ahead and get started. Now once my meat starts to cook, I really don't want to have to worry about anything else. So before I do anything with that, I'm going to go ahead and get my vegetables ready. This is really simple. It's just onion and shallot. And if you use onion soup mix, you can skip this step. But I prefer to try to cook with natural ingredients instead of things that are already packaged in bags or boxes or jars. So that's why I'm starting here. I'm just going to be slicing these onions. I'm not going to worry about dicing them, and I really like onions, so I don't mind leaving them a little bit on the larger side. But if you're not a big onion fan, you can either slice these really thinly or try to disguise them, or as I said before, you can just use the onion soup mix. That's what my mom used to use whenever she would make this dish. And I'll go ahead and dice up this shallot as well. Some of these brown parts out of the onion, I forgot to take these out. In my experience, shallot kind of behaves similarly to garlic. It's not quite as strong of a flavor, but if you leave it on the heat too long, it kind of starts to turn a little bitter. So I'm gonna treat this like I would garlic and just add this in for just maybe a minute when I'm heating it up. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this ready. The very first time I ever sauteed a shallot, I thought, oh my gosh, this smells exactly like onion soup mix, and that's why I add this into this dish now. And these are looking pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and set these aside and I'll get started on the meat. So what I have here is one top round steak. I'm not super familiar with the different cuts of meat, but I remember my mom using this pretty frequently. You just really want a really flat piece of meat, not too fatty, not a lot of things to trim off. And I'm going to slice this into about 1/2-inch strips. And then, actually, before I do that, let me season this. I have some seasoning in my Dredge bowl here, but I want to make sure I get this nice and seasoned, so let me grab my salt and pepper. And I'm going to pepper it first. Salt draws the moisture out, so you want to try and do that last if you can. I'll give these a little flip and do the other side. Alright, now we're good to go ahead and dredge this after it's sliced. By the way, you always want to use a serrated knife when you're cutting raw meat. Just makes things way easier. Now we're going to take our bowl of flour, salt and pepper, and I'm going to dredge the meat in here. So that's not complicated at all. We just want to drop these in a few pieces at a time. Make sure they're mixed well in the flour, coated on all sides. You can shake off any excess, but you want to make sure that it is fully covered. And we'll just put these aside onto this plate here so that I can have some more room in my bowl. My cat's asking to be let in, so I'll be right back. And we'll just continue to dredge these pieces of meat in batches until all of them are done. Cat, I know you're not asking for food already. It's too early. Some of this flour will come off when you're frying your meat, and that is totally okay and to be expected. That flour that comes off into the pan is going to be used to thicken the gravy later. By the way, this was about a heaping third of a cup of flour, and it looks like I'm going to have some leftovers for this one top round steak, so you can adjust accordingly. It's not a really huge deal if you run out. You can make some more easily. It's just salt, pepper, and flour. And once we're done with this, which it looks like I am, time to go heat up my pan and get my oil hot. So let's go over there and we'll get that going. Here's a little side note while I get this hot before I add the oil. I am gonna be roasting some broccoli as a side with this dish today, in addition to the rice I'll be boiling in just a little bit. So went ahead and preheated my oven to 425. All right, I'm starting to smell my pan now, so that's how I kind of know it's hot. You can kind of do the hover test too. So I'm gonna go ahead and add some oil. This time I'm just using some vegetable oil, not olive oil, but you can use whatever you've got on hand. And I'm just going to add just enough to coat the bottom of the pan. Some of this will get absorbed as we cook the meat, so feel free to add more if you run out in your pan. Just add it to a kind of a spot that will heat up fast as it rolls across the pan. I can tell that my oil is starting to shimmer. It's not quite boiling, but I can see it's got a little bit of movement to it on its own, so I'm going to go ahead and start browning my meat. Don't expect it to cook all the way through at this stage. It'll boil in the gravy for a little bit, but you want to go ahead and start getting that Maillard reaction going and getting some fond on the bottom of the pan. That's going to be where a lot of the flavor comes from. Don't overcrowd your pan because you don't want your meat to steam. You want it to get nice and golden brown. And depending on how much meat you're cooking, you may need to work in batches at this stage. I have another plate with a paper towel on it to the side here so that I can remove my meat when it's done browning and drain a little bit of that extra oil off while I keep cooking through the extra batches and also while I make the gravy. So before I flip these, I wanted to show you that the top of the meat is kind of, the flour on the top, I haven't flipped any of these yet. It's kind of melting into the oil. That's exactly what you want. I'm going to go ahead and check one or two of these to see how they look. They could still use a little bit more time. I think these are getting pretty close to being ready to flip. I checked this one earlier, and as you can see, it's not just brown, it's got nice little crusty bits on the edges, so this is ready to be flipped. I also think I've got enough room in the pan, since these kind of shrink as they cook, to go ahead and add some more meat to the pan. I want to show you this little uh-oh that I made right here. This is actually some flour that stuck to the bottom of the pan. My sister was asking me about this earlier, and I kind of told her the wrong thing. I mean, there will be some flour that comes off in the pan. It melts kind of into the grease until you're ready to make the gravy, but this is from flipping your meat too early or moving it before the flour has had time to release from the bottom of the pan. So if you're having this problem a lot, leave your meat until it's nice and easy to lift off the bottom. See, we have here on the other side, let's get that to focus here. Focus. There we go. So now we can see both sides have that nice golden brown color, nice crust, so we're ready to take off the first batch. Also, if it's ready to lift off, if it's easy to lift off, if it's ready. If it's kind of stuck a little bit still to the bottom, then you may want to give it just a few more seconds. That's nice and ready. This one's kind of stuck. I'll show you what happens. Actually, that did alright. I don't know if you can tell, but here is some of the flour that's come off in the bottom of the pan. That's exactly what you want to happen. That's going to act as our thickener later when we make our gravy. I need to hurry up and get the rest of these off. They're starting to get really brown on the bottom. Not quite burned, but they're very brown. Another sign that this sticking could mean is that you don't have enough oil in your pan. And like I said earlier, the oil does kind of get absorbed with the flour, so I might add a little bit more oil since I have some more meat to go. I'll move these up. They're not quite ready on that one side. Alright, so when this meat's done, our meat will be done and we can move on to the gravy. Alright, our meat is done. I've kind of scraped off some of these stuck on brown bits that the flour left. But this is going to be a lot of where the flavor comes from. And then also turn down my heat from a medium high to about a medium low. I don't want the same browning on the onions that I got on the meat. Maybe you do, but I just want my onions to be nice and soft, translucent, and not like fajita onions. I want them to be just kind of melting away into the gravy once we get that going. So I've turned my heat down a little bit. It's still pretty hot because I'm working with cast iron. I can still see it steaming. But I'm going to go ahead and get these onions added, and I'm going to stir frequently so that nothing sticks and gets too brown for my taste. You'll notice that the onions, as they release their moisture, may start to pick up some of those brown bits that we unstuck from the bottom of the pan, and that's perfect. Smells really good. I don't know how anybody can say they don't like onions. Oops. Ooh. And the onions, once you get them added, sorry about that, the onions will start to kind of cool the pan down as well, so I don't have to worry about them quite as much after they've been on here for a while. I just didn't want them to get stuck immediately. And I'll just cook these down for several minutes until they're nice and soft and starting to get a little translucent. And then we can continue on with the gravy. The next step after this is going to be to add the shallots and cook them similarly to garlic. I don't want them to be overcooked. And they're kind of a delicate vegetable, or aromatic, I guess I should say. I mean, they're a vegetable, yes, but they're really more for flavor than nutrition. And so I'll get those added in a little bit, and then I'll cool it down with about a cup of water, which is going to help make the gravy. And I haven't decided yet, but I'm thinking I didn't really lose much flour in the bottom of my pan, so I'm probably going to add about a tablespoon of flour to my cold water in the measuring cup. Kind of make a little bit of a slurry. The flour will help thicken the gravy up, but you definitely don't want to put cold flour in hot liquid, because as soon as you add it, it's gonna cook the outside and it'll be really hard to get all those lumps out. So I'll go ahead and get that ready while I wait on these to cook down. Quick side note here about the flour that I used. I reserved the flour that I dredged my meat in, so it's already seasoned. And I didn't want to waste more flour when I've already got some dished out, so I just put about a tablespoon of that seasoned flour into this cup of water. If I need to add more flour later to thicken it up more, I can, but like I said earlier, I only want to add cold flour to cold liquid, so if I need to add more flour later, I'll also have to add some more water. Alright, so I'm not quite sure how long these onions have been cooking. I've been stirring occasionally. I fed the animals and took a little potty break, and I'm here back now to check on them. They're nice and soft. It's hard to tell that they're translucent because they've absorbed so much of that fond from the bottom of the pan, which, as I said earlier, is exactly what you want. There are still a couple that look a little bit on the lighter or whiter side, but I think we're ready to go ahead and add our shallots. So I'm going to turn the heat back up to about a 6-ish, so medium, not quite medium high. And I'll go grab those shallots, get all those added into here. And once those become warm and fragrant, I'm going to go ahead and add my water. I don't want to overcook those too much. They can probably handle a little bit more abuse than the garlic, but I definitely don't want to overdo it. I should have stirred up my flour water again before I added it, but it's fine. It was moistened enough that it didn't clump. One more thing I'm going to add to this, I'll probably add some more salt and pepper, but I want to make sure I get my beef broth added, so let me grab that out of the fridge. Sorry, I said beef broth. I'm basically making beef broth with this water, and I've got some beef base in the fridge, so let me grab that. Okay, so I had to have my husband open this for me. It was really stuck shut. And I'm just going to go ahead and finish off this jar. You should typically, if you're using this beef base or chicken or whatever vegetable, they have different flavors. You want to use a teaspoon per cup of water. This is probably about a teaspoon, maybe a tiny bit more, but the date on it is September of this year, so I've only got a couple more months to use it, and I don't really use it that often, so I'm just going to give it a more hearty flavor and use it all in this dish. I can buy some more next time I go to the store. It's something that I really like to have on hand just in case. Gravy's already getting nice and thick because it was waiting on me to be able to open that jar. And honestly, the color of this gravy is a little bit lighter than I'd prefer, so I might get some extra. I've got some vegetable base in there too. I might just go ahead and throw that in for good measure. Judging by the look of this too, I might get a little bit more water in here as well, but we'll see. I'm just going to add a little bit of this vegetable base because it's looking like it's pretty close. It's just a little bit light. This will also give it a little extra flavor too.
Now that we've been able to eat this, I will say yes, the vegetable broth definitely added a depth of flavor that I am not used to having in this gravy, so I would highly recommend adding both beef broth and vegetable broth if you're going to make your own gravy.
It smells really good. I'm glad I decided to do that. And I do want there to be a good amount of gravy because we're going to serve this over rice, and I really like the gravy with the rice. So I'm going to add a little bit more, both water and flour, because this is actually not a bad consistency as it is. I think it could cook down a little bit more, and it will with the meat in it. So I'm going to get another, I'll start with another half cup of water and some flour and get that added in just a sec. Once this comes back up to a boil, I'll know that the flour taste has kind of been cooked out of it, and I'll give it a taste. I'm sure it's going to need some salt and pepper, but there's already some salt and pepper in my flour mixture and on the meat that's already been cooked in this pan, so I don't want to overdo it. That's why it's important to always taste your food as you're cooking. I cannot stress that enough. That is how I became... Well, I like to consider myself a pretty decent cook, especially when it comes to flavor, and that's because I taste it as I go. So I just gave it a taste test. It's actually not that far off on salt. I also forgot another source of salt are those vegetable and beef bases that I added. So I'm going to add some pepper and maybe just about a half a teaspoon more salt. Now if you're using onion soup mix, this step becomes really easy because you just sprinkle the onion soup mix in your pan and add water and let it cook down with the flour. And this could be a really quick meal if you do it that way. You also don't have to chop or, slice the onions or anything like that. So if you're doing it the quick and easy way, this could be done in about 30 minutes, give or take any time that you want to allow it to boil. My mom usually let it cook, I think, for about an hour. She liked to cook things, let things simmer for about an hour to kind of let the flavors meld. Didn't really matter what she was cooking, chili, spaghetti, this, anything that simmers for a while. I think she would generally use about an hour. Give it one more taste after that salt. Perfect. If you want to add any more spices, definitely feel free to do that. I think I've already got enough onion in here. I don't need any onion powder, and I'm not really used to having the garlic flavor in this dish since there is so much onion, but if you feel like it needs that, I mean, the beauty of cooking for yourself is that you can customize any meal that you want to be how you like it. So while this continues to thicken up, I'm going to go ahead and add my meat back into here and let that cook the rest of the way through. You can see on some of these pieces, I don't know if you can see that. It's a little bit dark in here, but it's still red in the middle, so let's go ahead and get this added back to the gravy. And while that cooks down a little bit, I'm gonna start my rice. I'm actually also gonna cover this a little bit, cover this while it simmers, because I don't want too much liquid to escape. It's already getting nice and thick, and I don't want there to be no gravy left when I'm ready to eat. So I'm gonna cover this real quick. I've also turned it down because if you've got it covered, it keeps the heat in and you don't need as much heat from the bottom. And I've got 2 cups of water in my pan over here with some salt. Salt's already kind of dissolved because it's warm over here. I'm going to crank that up and start a boil. And I'm using 2 cups of water because I'm cooking 1 cup of rice for my husband and I. We're just feeding 2 people today. So once that gets going, I'll start the rice, and I'll go ahead and get my broccoli ready as well. I'm going to cut that up and get that popped in the oven. The broccoli really only needs about 20 minutes or so to roast on 425, maybe a little bit less. So once I put the rice in the pot, it'll take about 20 minutes also. I'll try to time that so everything's done together.
And dinner is served. Let me know what you think about this video. I really encourage you to try this recipe and see what you think for yourself. If you're new around here, I'd love for you to subscribe and check out some of my new videos coming out soon. And I hope to see you next time. Bye guys.